the semester is like to the all engineering list about this class. So someone and everything. So it's been pretty neat.
Okay, hello everyone. Today is the last day of the lecture series that we have this semester. So before I introduce you to our speaker today, I have a couple of announcements. I talked to you about the course evaluation during last lecture. I put the link to the course evaluation forms on CTools. So if you haven't filled it out yet, just go to CTools and click on the tab that says course evaluation. It'll take you to the form that you can fill out. And also on CTools you will find the videos of past lectures, just in case you didn't know that. And also the questions that you turn in after each of the lectures, I compiled them into documents, and I also uploaded those on there so you can kind of get reminded of yourself, like what kind of questions you had in the future. So just to make the note of that. And I actually forgot to bring your past questions today. I was going to hand it out to you, but I forgot to bring it. It's probably sitting on my desk in my office. And what I would like you to do is, if you want those back, just come to my office hours next week, and you can just pick them up. Yeah, so although today is the last day of the lecture series, I'll have office hours until the end of the semester. So you can just drop by if you want to chat and also pick up your forms and stuff like that. Okay, so for the grand finale of this course, we have Patricia Olinik, who I think is very appropriate to put the finishing touch on this lecture series, because she was the person who pretty much initiated this interaction between the Life Sciences Institute and the Penny Stamps School of Art and Design. Patricia, she currently is the director for the Graduate School of Art and also professor at the Washington University in St. Louis. And for those of you who are art majors in this room, she was, before she moved to Washington University, she used to teach here at the School of Art and Design as a faculty member. And yeah, she was the first director for the Penny Stamps lecture series. So I was a student back then, and I used to enjoy the lecture series very much. Patricia's work employs microscopy and biomedical imaging technologies, and her expertise and her passion in this field got recognized, and for the first time for a non-scientist, she was appointed as the Research Associate Professor in the Life Sciences Institute in 2005. And without her and her work, I don't think this fellowship of art science that I am in would have been initiated. And this intimate connection that we have between STAMPS and the Life Sciences Institute would not have been the same without her. So I probably won't be here. You guys probably wouldn't be sitting here throughout the semester listening to art science talks. Her work deals with life at the micro and the macro level, and has been shown and recognized internationally, and ties together not only art and science, but also humanities and the socio-cultural understanding of life. And I hope you enjoyed Patricia Olinik's talk, and I hope this course has had a positive and lasting impact on your perspective about art and biology, and also the general study of life. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Patricia.
Oh, great. So I'll have to, trying to think. Is that okay? Can you still film? Okay. I just want you to be able to see these images as clearly as possible. So can you hear me in the back? Good. Thank you so much. And thank you, Leah, for that very generous introduction, although I think probably a lot of people fed into that terrific Penny Stamps program. But thank you. It was a joy to direct that program. So figure out a place to put this. That will do. So thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Leah Min, first of all, for this terrific invitation. Thank you to Art and Design. Thank you to the Life Sciences Institute, and also to the President's Office for funding this speaker series. I'm very, very grateful. And I know early on, Leah and I spoke about my doing a talk about blurring the boundaries between art and science. And I began thinking about what might be the best talk for this particular group. And I think rather than talking about blurring boundaries, I'm going to talk about specific points of connection between artists and scientists and humanists. I think there's a very rich and broad spectrum where artists and scientists can plug in different ways. And so rather than talking about it as a sort of blurry territory, I'll talk about specific points of connection in relationship to specific artworks, a few of my own and a lot by some other artists. And also I'll highlight an exhibition that was recently on at the Pratt Manhattan Gallery in New York, and also a UCLA symposium that I co-hosted with their California Nanosystems Institute. So cross-disciplinary based creative work that exists at the intersections of art, science, and technology, and also its related discourses, have been central to my own interests in my practice over the last at least 10 years, especially with regard to the more kind of humanistic encounters with the sciences. I'm especially interested in how images and objects exist within and between multiple spaces, and how these are encountered by various audiences. And through this, I'm particularly interested in the dialectics of mind and body, as that relates to cognition and sensation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I'm interested in the conception of the human and the artificial, right? The natural, unnatural, the human and the artificial. And sensing and knowing keep coming up in interesting ways in my work as well. Photography, microscopy, and biomedical imaging technologies, as we know, offer new insights and interpretations of the human body and the environment. And these allow us to probe the ways in which popular culture, but also institutional structures, shape our understanding of science and the natural world. It's no surprise that there's a growing interest in scientific visualization and imaging within the arts community, and that the representation and the reinterpretation of scientific images and data has the capacity to expand the interpretation of both of these within a much broader cultural context. One of these, of course, contexts is the aesthetic. For those of you who might know the book, Picturing Science, Producing Art, these are key ideas from that book that was written by Peter Gallison at Harvard and Caroline Jones at MIT. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that book, it's a very, very good one. So let's start by looking at the biology of the brain and neurocriminology. The scientific study of crime began in 1871 in Italy by Cesare Lombroso. And Lombroso was a comparative physiognomist, a psychiatrist, and also a prison doctor. And he was at an asylum for the criminally insane. And while he was performing an autopsy on a thief, he found a very unusual indentation at the base of the subject's skull. And from this singular observation, modern criminology was actually formed from this. Lombroso used calipers and craniometers, such as the ones that you see here, to calculate the degree of relative so-called disproportion of the subjects that he was studying. And the resulting data was used to chart the relationship between micro and macro features of the face. Lombroso's controversial work was based on the premise that the Homo delinquens was a biological mutation and a kind of evolutionary throwback. So he created an evolutionary hierarchy based on the pseudo-scientific phrenological theories about shape and size and relative features of the head. And these theories were widely accepted in the 19th and the 20th centuries. And for some people, there were some pretty horrific consequences. Of course, this is the early form of eugenics, and was and continues to be pretty controversial. Interestingly, we now have this contemporary sort of form of neurocriminology And so if we fast forward to our current day, we see that scientists have now developed a far more compelling argument for some of Lombroso's, the germ of some of Lombroso's ideas. And this is, of course, the genetic and neurological components of criminal behavior. So this is being studied widely. And here are two images of the prefrontal lobe of what you see on the right is someone who's a nonviolent person, and what you see on the left is a violent offender. And the prefrontal lobe is where conscience, remorse, and guilt are processed in the brain. So on the left, you see that there's very little activity in the prefrontal lobe, and on the right, you see that there's a lot. And this is extremely controversial research today because, of course, depending on your political views, you may say, well, this is letting criminals off for their behavior because you're simply saying it's a biological, it's biological factors that are regulating their behavior. For others, they're saying, well, this is very dangerous. There are other people who have very little activity in the front of their brain, and they're not violent offenders, so this is very dangerous territory. So all this to say, the history of criminology and the current day study of criminology are advancing in very interesting and in many ways very controversial ways. So a number of years ago, I was a Francis C. Wood Fellow at the College of Physicians in Philadelphia, and I had access to all of their collections, including some medical collections. And I began photographing a collection of human specimens that were collected for the study of comparative anatomy and physiognomy. These were collected in 1874, and they now reside at the College of Physicians, specifically in the Motor Museum. It's quite an extensive collection. And from this I produced a series of photographs of these post-mortem skull tattoos. Now this collection includes a very eclectic array of people, and these people were typically outcasts, eccentrics, notorious characters, or as they said in the 19th century, homo delinquens, right? And they were anomalous individuals, many of whom were lost to the world, and they, as specimens, they attest to a lived experience and to the social connectedness of the world, or the lack thereof of social connectedness, and to the interpretation of their various inscriptions. So these post-mortem skull tattoos, or the interpretation of these, change according to the reigning truths of the time that you're looking at them. So, for example, we look at two examples here. We look at Francesca Secora, who was a very celebrated prostitute in Vienna who died at the age of 19 of meningitis. And we see a famous Siamese criminal on the bottom, as we see on his accompanying archive card here, who was guilty of many atrocious crimes. So these were collected by someone named Dr. Hertel, who put together a collection of, I believe, 137 skulls. And he was looking for some correlation between the criminal behavior and the shape of the skull. So I began photographing the tattoos and also the archive cards to try and get a better sense of these individuals. Now, of course, there's a lot of different ways you can look at this material when you go beyond medical specimen. You, again, look at their sort of social standing. If they had a higher social standing, they had more on their archive card. If they had less of a social standing, or if they had physical anomalies that were visible prior to death. For example, one skull had one character, specimen had a boat-shaped skull, and he had simply scaphocephalus written across his skull. Nothing else about his life. So for this particular piece, here's one more. This is the Dutch suicide. For this particular piece, I decided to commission a series of writers. I'm commissioning medical ethicists, artists, poets, and I'll also be hiring a spiritual medium to actually have a seance to bring back one of these characters. The idea being that there's archival data, there's factual error, there's personal bias, and then there's our own individual conjectures and longings in the way that we piece together somebody's history. So these commissioned writers will write a series of fictional biographies that will then be read or performed by those that are commissioned. So, and again, you can see that this card attests to the tacit nature of knowledge, because we have the original card that says that this is a suicide from Amsterdam. In later years, you have a notation that says, don't know how we got this, right? So with time and distance between the original acquisition, suddenly this information is being questioned, and probably the original accessions people weren't available to answer that. So now, when I plug in to these kinds of systems, these often don't work anymore. So let's see. And if this video does not work, I will show the videos at the end off of my desktop. And sure enough, I can't find, whoa, I can find it. There it is. All right. Now this is Buzz Spector performing the last portion of his writing on the Dutch suicide. Oh, and you know what? I need to plug in sound. Oh, let's go back. I have a wild and marauding cursor. Nope.
It's a different cable that has
Ah,
the white
this has to go in here?
No.
No.
So
Okay.
you see those two cables coming out of the wall with the red and white A?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
It's probably that cable on top of the.
So this has to plug into my computer?
Yes.
Okay, that will do it. Thank you. Sorry for the glitch. This is worth waiting for. So let's try one more time. If not, I show them on the. Good.
The Dutch woman's pain was a pulse running through her days. Some who she lived among referred her to church, others to soup, or to poultices, or to beer. Her grimaces were sometimes mistaken for disapproval, her sighs for disappointment, her moans for despair, although on one occasion for ecstasy. Her doctors offered analgesics. One day, the old woman next door told her to stare at the sea and empty her mind of its prickly baggage. In the gray Dutch weather, it was impossible to tell the difference between sea and sky. The waves lapped against the dike, invitingly.
So we're working now on turning the readers into Pepper's ghosts. So I'll stay in touch with you and see how that project moves forward. Okay. So I'd like to move on and talk to you a little bit about this current exhibition that I guess it just came down. I'm supposed to be getting the artworks back very soon. This is an exhibition written by a particularly brilliant curator named Ellen Levy. This is called Sleuthing the Mind. As I said, it was shown at the Pratt Manhattan Gallery in the months of, September through November. And it's a curatorial project operating in the space between a thematic exhibition and an actual experiment, which analyzes how both new and traditional media may induce new experiences by directing our attention, our emotion, and our memory. The exhibition asks viewers to explore how art focused on the body can impact the systems of the brain, while technology and staging can bring adjustments of the body and our spatial positioning to conscious recognition. That's taken from the curator's statement. So some of the artists in the exhibition actually reproduce experiences from neuroscience, in which case the viewer is put to a kind of test, right? While others move towards affect politics or emotion. So this is a shot of the gallery. This is one of my works called Isomorphic Extension. These are two almost 6 foot high light box wall sculptures. So in this one recent series, I'm trying to mine a vast inventory of anatomical models and prosthetic devices, which were collected by the Mutter Museum for their historical value, in order to comment on the human desire to fetishize and even anthropomorphize these objects. And, really, they're about our kind of our modern desire to augment, control, and manipulate our corporal selves. So I don't know if you know much about prosthetics, but prosthetic care goes back to the 5th Egyptian dynasty, 2750 BC, and archaeologists have unearthed the oldest known splint from that period. The earliest known written reference to an artificial limb was made in about 500 BC. Herodotus actually wrote about a prisoner who lopped off his own foot and then replaced it with a wooden foot, so that he could actually escape being a prisoner, and so it was a rather dramatic exodus. So for this series, I'm really focusing on the brain's construction of an image of the body and the perceptual phenomena of phantoms. So you probably know that individuals who have lost a limb, almost without exception, experience this phenomena called the phantom limb phenomena. And remarkably, MEGs and MRIs are able to visualize changes to the cortical topography of the brain and changes to sensory neurons in the brain and research the brain's neoplastic qualities. It also allows researchers to study the conscious experiences of individuals who have lost a limb, these MRIs and these MEGs. And this is the scientific work in this area is by a scientist named Ramachandran. So research related to the phantom limb phenomena also provides a fuller understanding of how the brain constructs an image of the body. And who knows what this is? Okay, yeah, good. It's a somatotopic image of the brain, and it shows what parts of the brain govern which parts of the body. And the amazing effect of having a limb lost is that other parts of the body will move into that section of the brain. So I think that often the tongue ends up getting relocated in places, but different parts of the brain begin to regulate different parts of the body that they don't typically regulate. So that's a somatotopic map, and so this is just considered a complete reorganization of the body as a system. So back to this piece. So this piece is really a kind of macabre reversal of the phantom limb. So you've got these two prosthetic legs, they're different genders, they're different eras, and what I'm going after in this work is a particular kind of affect, because on one level, the brain begins to think about prosthetics and all of the things that I've just discussed. They evoke this age-old desire to exceed the natural limitations of the human body by means of art and technology. But the affect of the work, when the two are side by side and the viewing distance is correct, is that for many viewers, they begin to imagine the phantom body. So it's a piece really about this kind of macabre reversal of the phantom limb, phantom body. And I'd like to move on and show you some of the other works in this Sleuthing the Mind exhibition, because there were some pretty brilliant installations in that show. This is work by someone named Greg Garvey, and Greg Garvey's work focuses on something called cognitive dissonance. And this work was inspired by the work of Mike Gazzaniga, the book called The Bisected Brain, and Gazzaniga's experiences with patients with a severed corpus callosum. And this was the severing of the corpus callosum, the two parts of the brain, was at one point a treatment for epilepsy. So Garvey thought it might be possible to target each hemisphere of the normal brain by delivering video and audio directly to the separate visual and auditory pathways. So he creates this kind of split brain interface that delivers two independent video and audio streams in parallel to one another. right? And so what he's doing is he has creatively aligned the cognitive difficulty with the political dissonance of the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings. So does anybody know this particular political, does anybody not know it? It's okay if you don't. If you don't know it, okay. So Anita Hill had accused Clarence Thomas, who was a very prominent political figure in the Supreme justice system, of sexual harassment, turned into a big media fiasco. And what Garvey does, this is the study by Gazzaniga. It's a test where you look at this shape and you can either see the vase or the two faces, right? Who sees the vase? Who sees two faces? Right. The brain has to choose. So this is what Garvey is saying, is the brain has to choose. So he puts a photograph of Anita Hill on the left, and he puts a photograph of Clarence Thomas on the right, and you have to look through this viewing device, and the brain has to choose. So it's really a pretty brilliant piece. This was just written up in Art News, and I can send the links out to Leah. You can distribute it to your students if you like. But I think it's a particularly brilliant piece. This is a work by Nicole Oediger. This is called the Oculus Rift piece. And Nicole's work is informed by the work of Olaf Blanc and the autoscopic phenomena, or the out-of-body experience. Blanc's work focused on the disturbed self-processing at the temporoparietal junction, which is a neuroscientific phenomena. And what Nicole does, she puts on this Ocular Rift headset. And what this does, there's a camera behind her. What it does is it allows her to see, as she looks through the viewing device, an image of herself, but from 10 feet behind with a 5-second delay. And while she's wearing this headset, she's attempting to do a self-portrait. So that kind of weird scribble octopus-looking thing there, that's her self-portrait. So it just creates a really kind of interesting spatial disunity between the eye and the body. And the artist says, I thus saw the view of myself, of my own body, from behind and in 3D, as if I were 2 meters in front of myself during the art-making process. This external, behind-the-body perspective is outside of what is normal. So again, this shift of perception dramatically impacted her ability to produce a self-portrait that really looked very much like a human. Who's familiar with this work? Right. Very good. Okay, so this is Marina Abramovich, whose piece called The Artist is Present was installed at MoMA probably 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And as you know, audience members were invited to simply sit and gaze into the artist's eyes. And the experiences were said to be quite profound. The line was too long each time I went, but pretty interesting piece. The work by Suzanne Dicker and Matthias Oostruck from the Sleuthing the Mind exhibition draws from The Artist is Present. And they worked with Marina Abramovic. They took her piece and they had her sit in a laboratory at NYU, and they had her in front of other sitters, and the sitters and Marina were both wearing EEGs to check synchronization of the brains, and remarkably, her alpha brain waves were more active during the meditative states than her sitters. However, the piece measured 30 minutes of mutual gaze, and the experiment was a test of interconnectedness. When the two sitters would be in sync, there would be a pulsation of light that would happen between these two brain scans. And it would look kind of like a stream of lightning. So the EEG shows the pulsating brains easing into a meditative state of mind. They said that it wasn't for the purpose of proving anything other than just sort of getting into a kind of same meditative state. And I suspect this is going to lead to speed dating, but I could be wrong. And there's the picture of the brain with those kind of electrical pulsating forms between them. Here's another shot of the gallery, and these are works by someone named Neen Humphrey. And Neen was an artist in residence at a neuroscientist lab. The neuroscientist was Joe Ledoux. And she was focusing on the neurons surrounding the amygdala, which is the emotion center of the brain. And here what she's done is she's used the patterns and the method of Victorian lace making, which was used in rituals of grief, to mimic the neuronal connections that she would see under the microscope. So she would see these forms, and then she would use this Victorian lace method to create these really stunning works. And so you can see that the different approaches that the artists in this exhibition took were very, very different. Here's another one. Who is familiar with this experiment here? Does anybody know this one? Okay, very good. So this is Daniel Simons and Chris Chablis, and this is a piece. I'm showing this to you because this and the work of the American philosopher and psychologist and physician William James were both the inspiration to Ellen Levy's gallery work. And so Simons and Chablis were working with inattention blindness. So if you know this test, you know that you're shown about a 30-second clip of people passing a basketball to one another. And some of the people in that group are wearing white shirts. And you are expected to count the number of basketball passes between members of this group who are only the ones wearing white shirts. So, you know, the clock is set off, we're watching this, and we're counting the number of passes so intently that in many cases we miss this person in a gorilla outfit walking right through the center of the group. Very high percentage of people miss this. And this test was staged to prove that if we are hyper-focused on one aspect of a situation, we might miss something else that's very important. So Ellen was very inspired by this work and by the work of William James, who was focused his research on attention. And she produced this work that starts with, "Would you like to play three-card Monte with George Bush?" It's a political piece she made in 2003, and she's got a series of hands with cards, hands of cards, flashing in front of these different artifacts. And you are instructed by the video, by the text at the beginning of the video, to count the number of times that the Queen of Hearts comes up. And you're so intent on counting those Queens of Hearts that in many cases you miss what's behind. And what's behind are the artifacts that were looted from the museum in Iraq during the Iraq invasion. So this was a commentary on how the distraction of the war prevented us from really paying attention to the tremendous amount of kind of cultural theft that was happening at the time. And so this is a case where the actual artwork mimics the same process and procedure as the original neuroscientific experiment.